All right, we're recording. This is September 9. It is office hours for service APIs. Big thank you to everyone who keeps on showing up. I know 2 meetings a week, an hour each, basically, and many hours in between working on this. I appreciate all the contributions from everyone. I feel like we really are in the final stretch, at least towards an API that people can use. With that said, let's go through this alpha checklist. I actually ran out of time to update it completely, but we got a ton of things in over the past week. I'm really excited about that. Lots and lots going on. At long last, the SNI and mode PR is merged. Harry, I was going to ask you about TLS route. Do you think this should be part of V1 Alpha 1?
Um, I mean, I have a hard time deciding, but I think people have asked for that functionality, so um, we could keep it out as well. I mean, it's an independent PR from the other two.
Right, yeah.
So, but I think it should be close with the review. So
Okay.
yeah, I'm fine either ways personally.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. That seems like a reasonable stretch goal, if nothing else. Thanks for the work on that one. I think we'll have time to look at it today. The TLS on route, this seems fairly straightforward. I think I've already reviewed this.
Yeah, I
It
think
seemed
there's
like
some naming that needs to be sorted out of
okay,
where to put the structs. But I
okay,
think otherwise we seem to have a consensus on it.
great. Route filter is merged. Request mirror, I think, is awfully close. We'll get a chance to look at that today. UDP route is in. Hurrah. I guess I can move that to completed. Oh well. Backend policy, the PR still exists. It does still need a bit of review. It is really tiny at this point. Like every time I make a change to it, I make it a bit smaller, it seems like. But that is where it is right now. You can see where I dropped off here. There's one more PR that I was going to add that covers conflict handling. And then I think so I have 3 PRs open related to this. I think once they're in, maybe conflict handling will be complete enough for V1 Alpha 1, but I'm open to feedback or other things that we might want to cover here. And then finally, for cleaning up status and conditions, again, I ran out of time to add things to this list, but James has at least 2 new PRs in this space, and I think we may have some time to look at them today as well. And then somebody added this one, which is good. Yes, we should have a test.
I added that. Just
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've been saying for a long time and just haven't done it that we need some CI that does exactly that. That would be amazing.
Yeah, that could be kind of like our last little check mark, is make sure that all the install and example stuff works. And then maybe absolutely. If we don't have an issue for it, is maybe after the release we look at doing CI for it.
Yep. That makes sense. Cool. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I think we're at a decent spot. I guess the other one is there are significant holes in our documentation right now, and so again, this feels like kind of a final step, but also an important one to make sure that this is all presentable and understandable. Cool. All right. Well, without further ado, let's get into PR and issue triage. There is a lot going on. Yeah, this is going by most recently updated. No, most recently updated. Is this right? Yeah. Okay. whether or not that's correct or not, I think we'll have time to get through a lot of these PRs today. Harry, any thoughts? It looks like this one was recently updated.
Yeah, I just added a comment. I think James asked a question. So the plan here is to, I think we already discussed this a couple of times. I just haven't had time to get around to it. If you scroll up a little bit up, the plan is to replace what we have right now inside with what James has proposed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I just haven't had time last week with long weekend and
Okay.
some time off. So yeah, I'll get to this definitely this week. Yes.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah. And actually, yeah, maybe we'll prioritize PRs from Harry because I know you've got to drop a little early, or I'm assuming that's the case.
Yeah.
So the next one is request mirroring. I feel like this is awfully close at this point. There's a bit of feedback. You created a follow-up issue for this one. And I think John created a follow-up issue for this one. So for those without context, I had suggested that the names here were not particularly consistent. Well, they were consistent, but they were confusing. Like request header and request mirror feel like very consistent names that mean very different things, where one is about modifying headers and one is about mirroring a request. Maybe that is similar. I don't know, but I thought there was room to make the names a little bit better. Harry has filed a follow-up for this one. And then the other question came from John, and this was about mirroring, and specifically for Istio's use case, their mirroring implementation allows for mirroring a percentage of traffic. And it was more of a generic question of, is there a way to extend these kind of filters, or do they really just have to create their own? And at this point, I think the answer was that for now, core filters will be things that can be broadly supported. And if we need things beyond that, then for now, the best approach is a custom extension. At least for V1 Alpha 1. I looked around and all I could find is, Istio, and of course Envoy behind the scenes supports this, but I can't find many common implementations of this. So at least for now, it seems like something like we can punt a little bit. So with that said, I think that's all feedback resolved on this PR. Would you agree with that, Harry?
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's a pretty simple and straightforward filter. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's there was also this this comment I should mention about right now the only way to indicate this is an invalid route status condition. I think some of James' PRs will make this slightly easier to communicate in the future. But for now, I think this is, again, just something we can follow up on later. So I'll come back through here. I'm tempted to approve this one and just get it in today. If anyone has any reasons we should hold on to it, let me know. Otherwise, I'll pull it in. The next one is, let's keep on running through Harry's for a little bit here. The downstream TLS.
I think this one needs a little bit of documentation. Last time, I think James said that when to use this feature, right? Like we need to document as to when to use TLS config and route and when not. So that's one thing that needs to be done. And second is, I think, naming here. And I don't really have, again, any strong opinions on naming. So I can follow whatever I think, Rob, you are following in the gateway, the backend config, and or what James is proposing.
Yeah, I'm good with any kind of consistent pattern. I think initially the TLS in foo pattern seems a bit weird, but it's actually kind of, I thought about it for a bit, and I think it's pretty clear. So I really like how clear it is. But it'd be great just to, so instead of having like TLS config and then all the other ones, you just have them all as following the same convention everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we should not even have like a generic TLS config, which applies to gateway.
Agreed.
So we can rename that too. Okay, I'll take care of and propose something, and I think we can take it from there.
Yeah, I'm with James on this one as well, in the sense that like what I done with backend TLS was backend TLS config. I think I'm fine with what you have here, which is a TLS config in route. Is that it, or
Yes.
some variation of that?
Yeah, something like that.
TLS in route config. That's what it is. So you'd have TLS in gateway config, TLS in backend config. I don't care too much. I just, as long as it's consistent and as long as these all live in the same place, I'm okay with that. It's not like our users are going to be interacting. Well, I guess implementations will be interacting with these types, but as long as our field names make sense and as long as our type names are consistent, I think that's good. So yeah.
Okay, sounds good. There is one more comment by James, which I actually haven't looked at it yet. I think it's down.
Yeah, so this one, I guess the allowed, and it says about the naming of the allowed in route and how that's going to look in YAML, because I just feel like in the YAML allowed in route requires this extra knowledge to read. It's not just immediately obvious what it seems to be doing. So it's not that big a deal. I think in the context of this PR, we can come back and tweak the name. But I wonder if there's sort of a more evocative name that we could choose.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Like I personally do like allow route certificates. I think that makes a lot of sense. It, however, blocks like right now we are doing only certificate in route. I don't know if there is in future a scope of allowing for more settings in route, right? Like right now we have made that conscious decision to allow only certificate.
Yeah, I got halfway through typing the comment when I realized that maybe the intention was to import config in general. So I like the route, the certificates specific ones. It's a lot more concrete, but then, yeah, you're right. It does, maybe it's over constrained.
Yeah, so I thank you for bringing this up, because the first time I read through this PR, I had not the exact same thought, but I was thinking, man, that there should be a better term here, but I don't know what it is. And every term I thought of was, like 5 words long. It, is very, hard to get a concise name here. Another thing I'm thinking of as we're, as we're looking at it now, is something like allow route override or something like that. But it seems like what we're trying to describe here is allowing the route to override these default settings or something like that. I don't know. But yeah, any ideas for better names are entirely welcome here.
Totally, yes. I have no opinions on this, and this is really hard here.
Yeah.
So maybe I think the word import something from route, or
Yeah.
merge with route or something is could be starting points. Actually, while we're on this topic, do you think there is a use case for wanting to say just import the certificates versus import any TLS config?
So I think right now we have a TLS in route config because we only allow for the certificate. We do not allow you to set any other settings. So right now we should have we only do allow for one thing, but I think there is scope for adding more in future. So
Yeah, I mean, if that's tough because we don't know what we might add at route level in the future. Because, you know, if it is really just certificates, I think there's a strong argument to be made for the suggestions that James has here of allow route certificates or import route certificates.
Rob, do you
And
see the
then
comment from Bowie?
No, thank you.
in Zoom, yeah.
Thank you. So Bowie's comment is, should it be override or just have the bool true and no cert at the top level? And can we get in trouble via merge? That's a good question.
And I was kind of thinking the same thing as what Bowie was saying. Should it just be an override where if certificate ref is defined at the route level, that it just overrides the certificate defined at the gateway level?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
I think
am I missing something with what allowed in route is trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. So if you define a route with a host name and you define a certificate, that would override the certificate defined in the gateway. But then in certain cases you can have listeners which match any, meaning you need to have a default certificate defined in gateway. So that's why it's sort of a mix of override and a fallback.
And I think the idea is also that you may not want to always allow routes to provide certificates at all, right?
Yep. Yeah. But by default, allowed in route is set to false, so you can only configure
Right,
certificates in gateway in
Yeah,
the gateway.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay, well, this seems like a great opportunity to suggest names here. And Bowie, so a couple more comments from Bowie here. If the top level has star.foo.com and the route has bar.foo.com, I'm assuming this is related to to certificates.
Yeah, so then bar.foo.com gets served from the route certificate. So like if you have a request from that, the certificate defined in route is served. But if you have a certificate for anything else, the gateway has to fall back to the certificate defined inside the gateway. Unless
yeah, I mean,
you also have a bars.foo.com at the route level, which also defines a certificate, right? Like the certificate inside route is optional, right?
Right, but if the route doesn't define a host name, let's say, and the route matches all host names, but the route happens to have a cert that only covers bar.foo.com,
I think that would be invalid. Like if you define a TLS config, I think you can define it, but semantically that should be invalid inside a route.
Yeah.
If you define a certificate in route, you need to have a host
name. Okay.
I mean,
Did the API docs call that out?
I don't think so, but I'm taking a note right now. I don't think so.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. Yeah,
to me, it's like if we're struggling finding a name, I almost feel like, do we need to step back and say, is this the right approach? I mean, what if we kind of flip the solution upside down and said, okay, well, could we tag a certificate on the gateway as a default certificate, so that if the certs at the route level don't match, then the certificate at the gateway level that's marked as a default certificate can be used for the route.
I think that's similar. It is different, but we still would need to. I think we would still want to opt in to route level TLS config and provide a way to opt in at gateway level, right? Like you still need some kind of indication on the gateway that routes are able to provide TLS certs, I think. I don't think we want that to be default on.
Yeah, I guess. Hopefully is my audio okay?
Halfway.
Too much noise
I
on
can
the side.
hear.
Okay. All right. So that's why I was chatting. I guess my comment was like, do we need to support overrides, or can we have? Yeah, I guess it's going to be hard because if you wanted to do an override, you would have a listener block that has all hosts with a certificate there, and then your route would have the specific certificates. I'm just thinking, like, can we make the merge logic easier if we impose more restrictions?
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, so we should. It's routes can override, right? And then there is also a conflict possible in this case where multiple routes define the same host name and define a TLS certificate, and that needs to be. I think I have clarified it. Uh, but it's usually about overriding it, right? It's not about like you if you don't define a gateway certificate at the gateway level and you don't define at the route level, then you have undefined behavior essentially, right? But if you define one at the gateway and you define at the route one takes precedence. If you define one at gate, if you don't define it to the gateway and you define it route, then again it's the route. And you don't define it route, then the gateway one takes precedence. I think I said a lot of things.
The other thing is in the HTTP route. Okay, and then let's say you would define a certificate HTTP route. Is it a natural thing that the host name at the HTTP route will line up with the certificate? I'm just thinking in terms of like configuring. Let's say I like hand translated this to some proxy config. Like, would we get into trouble in translating certain things that you can do at the route level? Like, what kind of restrictions will we have to impose to make sure that we don't end up with strange configs? So, like, let's say the host name match doesn't match the way the certificate matching happens, and then how do you like line those up?
I see. So are you saying like you have a different SNI on TLS handshake and a different host on the HTTP request on top of that TLS session?
No, that's a different thing. I'm saying like the way we define route is that the host name is it a TLS wildcard? I was thinking like the wildcarding. Did we define
I
it
see,
to
I
be
see,
compatible?
I see your question. Yeah. So I think the way in the entire API, wherever we define TLS, we have made a decision to be explicit about which SNI to bind or which wildcard SNI to bind to which certificate, right? And that's evident inside the listener, inside gateway, and the same applies in the route as well, right? So proxies are not supposed to infer the SNI based on the SANs or CNs inside the certificate itself, right? So here, like you can see in the HTTP route, you have the host name array, which is an array, and which you have the config, right? So on line 50 or line 60, you have host names, and line 69, you have TLS in route config. So whatever configuration you define, that applies to the host names you have defined in that route, right? And the same is in the gateway. So you should have a consistent matching. You definitely can have collisions if you define things in the route, right? And that is something the user has to take care of. Where, this is essentially a use case where you're spinning up services which are on separate domains, right? If you have just a single wildcard certificate, our guidance should be that just define it at the gateway layer and call it a day, right? Like you don't really need the complexity of defining TLS and route at that point.
Yeah, I'm looking at the language, and it looks like it is exactly TLS one, so we probably won't get into trouble.
All right, great feedback on this one. What do we need next on this? Harry, do you have enough feedback to go forward and make any changes, or could you use some help with a bit more feedback or naming advice or structure?
Yeah, so naming advice, I'm like the naming of allowed in route, I think allow overrides in route, does that help make it clearer?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
I think
take
that override sounds, to me, sounds like what it's doing.
Okay, so maybe then I'll change it to allow overrides in route, and I'll avoid having certificate in there, so just so that it's not too narrow. And then we can have this discussion.
One other thing is, I don't know if you had a look at your PR. Do we clarify if you have an empty certificate up here? Is that a valid thing? Not empty, just like all the certificates have to come from your routes. Is there a way to express that?
All the certificate that come from a route. So you mean empty certificate inside the listener?
Yes. Is that valid? Do we want it to be valid?
I think we do clarify that that is not valid. I'll take a note to make sure that we do clarify that the gateway has to provide like a fallback certificate, I think.
Yeah, it looks like certificate ref is required as it stands right now. That seems reasonable to me.
I mean, if you're defining a TLS config, then you have to provide a certificate.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, maybe it's just a documentation for a certificate of a TLS config that states if the certificate's not defined at the route level, that the certificate at the gateway level is used.
Yeah. So I think I have necessary feedback here. Thanks, Daniel. So I'll make sure that language is updated to include that gateway must have a certificate even if allowed in route is set to true, and a certificate ref at the route level takes precedence. So I'll go through it and make sure that we have the necessary language in there.
Great, thanks. All right, we've got a lot more to get through here. I guess we can start moving back up. James, you made a PR recently to standardize on route status fields. Do you want to provide any additional background? This seems pretty straightforward. You're just merging the status for HTTP route and TCP route at this point. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think this was something that occurred to me when I was looking at Harry's TLS route, and I realized that the conditions and the status that Micah did for HTTP route makes sense for everything. And I think that for any kind of route, knowing that it's been accepted by specific gateways is status that we want to expose. So we can make that common. And yeah, for some kinds of routes, we might also want to have additional status, but I think for the V1, just having that common, your route got admitted somewhere is generally what we should do.
Yeah, that makes sense. And this does also feel like a place where the, like as we were discussing earlier, that mirroring condition where a condition that a mirroring config is invalid may only be true for one controller that is referencing a route, where multiple controllers may be interacting with a route at the same time. And so having status be per gateway, as this proposes, allows us to have additional conditions beyond just admitted here. Was that your intention?
It's a nice extrapolation of my intention.
Okay. Okay.
Great. Yeah, I think it's right. Like, I mean, I think one way to do it could be exactly that. You say the admitted condition is false, and then there's a reason or some additional error. I hadn't thought through it as far as that, but I think
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Okay. Great. The extra point I was going to have here is, already probably since you created this PR, we now have UDP route merged in. Potentially in the next week or however long, we'll have TLS route merged in. So we are starting to multiply the number of routes we have to deal with. So we have to start thinking about what we can safely share between them, and also how we can extend any shared type. So as an example, for these kind of conditions, would it be safe to say that they will all have the same shared set of conditions, but say HTTP route may have a way of adding additional conditions that only apply to HTTP route or TLS route or whatever it happens to be? I don't know. Have you thought about how that might work?
So I think that's possible. I was more imagining it that HTTP route and other things would have additional status fields that wouldn't
Okay.
necessarily be conditions. But I think as we get more different route types, it's important to consolidate the APIs across them so that they're predictable. So
Yeah.
I think it's way easier to have 6 different route types which all conform to the same patterns and
Yeah.
structure than it is to have 6 different ones that are completely different.
Agreed. Great. Yeah, this seems pretty straightforward to me. I didn't really have much in the way of comments other than this one.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
depending on the order of which things land, I'll rebase
Right.
one on the other so that the route condition will become a generic meta v1 condition.
Yeah.
That's going to erase the type of the type field. So you won't, so type then wouldn't be route condition type, it would just be string.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. And just for the sake of consistency, we'll skip on down to that one because it seems closely related. This is based on Tim's feedback, so thanks for getting something in that he'd suggested, and you may have already been thinking about separately as well. I'm not sure, but yeah, just switching over to the shared condition type, which apparently is the standard we're supposed to be using everywhere. Anything else to say about this one?
Yeah, just one thing. Again, just to re-emphasize the point that we're going to be that making the switch erases the type of the type field. So instead of having listener condition type, which is a strongly typed type field in the condition, it's just string. So there's a little bit less typing, a little bit less, static typing assistance to the implementer, but there's also a little bit more freedom to add your own implementation specific conditions.
Yeah, makes sense. And on that note, for the time being, you're going to still define these types, but just so it's clear what each potential condition type is for, I guess, what resource it's for.
Yeah, as a kind of a practical matter for this PR, I wanted to keep the change isolated. I didn't want to deal with more than one change
Okay.
in one PR. But I think that it's useful to keep the type. I think that in general it will be useful to preserve the typing on those things, because it just uses the type system to give a little bit of enforcement and guidance to the classification. Right? So when we discussed the document before, and we're still going to have this kind of classification of where you should use types, where you should use condition types with different class types. You know, these sort of conditions go with the gateway, these sort of conditions go with routes, and so on. And just trying to use, and just using what typing system facilities we have to kind of collect those, I think is probably a bit more helpful than just depending on naming convention.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great. Any hesitance to get this one in? I think this is quite straightforward. Yeah, this is an unfortunate side effect. Some new indirect requires. But yeah, maybe we're just not updating this enough. Okay. All right, we'll keep on moving then. Another couple from Harry as we go down the list, and I'll come back to this guidance on conflict resolution. This is a new PR for this week. I created this yesterday. I think it's relatively straightforward, though I have not responded to James' feedback yet. I will get to that soon. Thank you for reviewing this. Just as a high level, the scope of this PR was to add some guidance, add the guiding principles to the documentation covering conflict resolution, and say, you know, if we have not covered a conflict in the docs for a specific type, use these principles to resolve any conflicts. And then beyond that, I added 3 or 4 different resolutions to conflicts inside the Go doc for relevant types, and suggested validation as well. So this is, I think, a relatively small PR, but I do need to work on some of the wording for sure. Yeah, thanks. I do need a new line. This one, I'll respond to some of this feedback in here, but thank you so much for the feedback. And if anyone else is interested in conflict resolution, any feedback is appreciated. But I think that's straightforward enough, so I'll just keep on moving on this one. Keep on going back down. This is one that has been brought up before. I think everything is resolved. There's not much in the way of comments or feedback on this one yet. At this point, it just needs an LGTM from someone. The way I look at this is not in any way preventing us from adding a namespace ref in the future. It's just updating our docs to reflect what already exists, what is already possible, because our docs as they exist right now are incorrect. So in that sense, I think of this more of a bug fix, a documentation fix, than an actual change in behavior. Yeah, so if anyone has time to take a look at this, it's a pretty small PR. Yeah. And we'll keep on going. I think I'd really like to get some of these older PRs in. So I've got this one, which is allow gateway namespaces, and basically changing it to suggest that it should be done on create only. Again, this is removing this condition and saying that this will instead be validated entirely by a validating webhook. So that seems straightforward to me. It definitely gets rid of some potential conflicts and some potential large blast radius changes. The longest discussion on here is a thread between Harry and I, and I think the conclusion is that we can track this as a separate issue. But there was a suggestion that maybe we should still have a condition here, a condition to indicate that a gateway is in an invalid namespace. So as an example, a gateway somehow got created, the webhook validation failed, or the namespace allowed namespaces changed. I don't know, something like that. And a gateway is in a namespace that it shouldn't be in, or that is not allowed by that gateway class. And this condition still wouldn't prevent the controller from actually implementing the gateway. It would just be more of a warning. And my hesitancy with this condition is that it's something that can't be consistently applied, because we don't know that every controller is going to be able to see every namespace. So we can't guarantee that a controller is going to be able to meaningfully say that a gateway exists in an invalid namespace for a class. So based on that, I was hesitant to do this. But either way, I think we can handle that in a separate issue. And if we do push that off to a separate issue, this becomes an absolutely tiny PR. So again, this one just needs a tiny bit of feedback. Does anyone have any thoughts on this one? I know we've discussed this before.
I don't have any thoughts, but I'll review. But
Cool.
So if I don't,
I appreciate it.
just keep poking
Thank you.
until I do it.
Thanks. Sounds good. Thank you. This is another one by me, and this is adding gateway selection to routes. And this is, I think we covered this in more detail last week. And if anyone has had more time to think about it and potential ramifications, the entire idea is to flip everything on its head, remove this whole concept of allowed route namespaces from gateway class, and instead allow routes to specify which gateways can select them. So it still requires two different personas for gateways and routes to be able to reference each other, multi-namespace, cross namespaces. But in this case, it pushes those personas down. So it's basically route owner and gateway owner that need to agree instead of gateway and gateway class owner. It seems like a fairly straightforward change. This is based roughly on some feedback that I got from Tim. I think this is going to create a better user experience and also minimize the need for, tons of new gateway classes for each combination of allowed route namespaces. I don't know. This one, again, is really just needing some review. I know we've talked through this one already. I don't think there's too much more I have to add today. Other than that, if you have some time to take a look at it, that would be very much appreciated. Yeah. Any last words on this one? Any reasons that we might want to be hesitant here? Any things we should look out for? Cool. All right. We'll keep on moving down. Backend policy. This one did have some meaningful changes over the last week, so I'll get into them a little bit. Thank you to everyone for the feedback on this PR. Backend policy, like I've said, every time I change it, it gets smaller. So that's where we are. I looked around the community for use of TLS certificates after I think it was some feedback from James, and he had mentioned, previously I had two separate references here. I had one for a CA bundle and one for the certificate. And James had mentioned, well, you could combine those all into a single TLS secret with Kubernetes. I think that's a reasonable place to start, at least. The key is that we need to agree on the key CA bundle should be specified under. So in this case, it may optionally include a certificate authority bundle under a ca.cert key, data field, whatever. This matches, I can't see too many providers that are doing this right now, but Nginx Ingress is a notable one that does support this methodology. The way Nginx Ingress approaches this is you can provide this in the same secret, or you could have two separate secrets. You could have one for client cert and one for CA bundle. In this case, I've consolidated it all with the single secret approach. I think that is simple in terms of less secrets to manage. It is unfortunate if you want to, use the same CA bundle a ton of different times and you then have to embed it in each one of your secrets. I can see that getting potentially annoying in this use case. But yeah, this does seem like a simple approach, and I think a compelling reason to start here is it doesn't prevent us from adding an Nginx-like approach in the future where you can also separately specify a CA bundle if you prefer.
I have thoughts. So originally, when I was talking about the CA cert, I was looking at it from the perspective of you have a certificate, a key, and a CA bundle, and you want to put them all in the same secret. And the CA bundle is the one for the certificate that you have in the secret, so they all match. I only found out about how Nginx Ingress uses the CA cert data field when I tried to kind of standardize it upstream. And honestly, I'm not a fan. The problem I think I see with the way Nginx does it is that you have a single secret with two completely different disjoint things in it, right? So you have a single secret which has your client certificate and your key and someone else's CA bundle.
Yeah.
So you take two things which are completely independent, completely separate and have no relationship, and then you stuff them into the same secret. And stuffing them into the same secret, I think, communicates that these things are a single item in some sense. They're a whole, but they're not. So although I want to standardize using the ca.cert data field, I don't want to standardize it for this.
That's
Does
fair.
that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, as I read through Nginx implementation, it did seem, I agree with how you were describing this as, shoving in two things that aren't entirely related. I mean, they're both used for a similar purpose of client TLS, kind of, but but yes, it's not an obvious relationship. And if you just saw these, certs and CA bundle hanging out together in a secret, you might think they were more closely related than they are.
Yeah, and I think it's confusing because you have two completely different use cases
Yeah,
that are
that's
represented
fair.
in the same way in a secret, and you can't tell them apart.
Yeah. So
Um,
I think the way I'm understanding that then is that it may be better to go back, to take one step back and have a CA cert ref, a CA bundle ref, and a client certificate ref, and just kind of keep them separate.
yeah, I think for CA bundles, I would support. I think standardizing the CA cert to store a CA certificate bundle in a kind of abstract sense, and I think that makes sense. I think that if this API can standardize that key, then I think that's good for the ecosystem. But I think specifically, sorry, here in the backend TLS config, I think we should distinguish between the client certificate that you're presenting, and the policy in which you're using to validate the peer that you're connecting to.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Any other thoughts on this one? Anyone else have the same kind of hesitation here between shoving everything into a single TLS secret?
Yeah, I'd agree with James. I'd prefer the
Okay.
separation.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That
Bowie
makes sense.
concurs.
Yeah. Sounds good.
As far as peer validation policy goes, I think there's a number of things that you might want to validate. I mean, there's obviously the CA routes. There's also, the host. You also usually validate some sort of host name. You can have certificate validity. I only want to connect to things which are valid for some period of time in the future, and so there's probably enough there that we want to think about how it might be extended.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense not to combine it with the secret. So is it instead going to be a config map?
I had thought of it being another object ref, a separate object ref for to reference a CA bundle.
Okay, I guess we let you specify secret or config map.
Yeah, it defaults to a secret, but it could be either.
What's the implementation support for secrets which contain the CA cert data field for bundles? I know Contour supports that for validation, but I don't know about any other Ingress controllers.
That's a good question. I know if you're going to make it a Kubernetes TLS secret, it needs to have the TLS cert and TLS key fields. So I guess it would have to not be this secret type and just have this specific key in it. But I'm not sure how broadly that's supported.
It could be an opaque secret, but I think using a config map makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, what do you see as the value of a config map over a secret here?
Just semantically, there's nothing secret about the CA,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, you're right. I'm just so used to anything vaguely related to TLS being in C, but yeah, you're right. Interesting.
But remember, there's a large proportion of users who are going to be using things like Cert Manager to generate secrets. So I think I agree that supporting a config map makes sense for some implementations, but there's also this wider ecosystem, like what does everybody else, what all these other tools do? Because we will have to kind of agree on where we're storing things.
Yeah.
So James, to your point, to integrate with something like Cert Manager, then the CA certificate should be or needs to be in a secret as opposed to a config map.
Thinking back, I'm not sure I had a point, but I should have. Maybe my point is that we should strongly, in this API, we should strongly define what the formats of all these things are and give the ecosystem something to coalesce around. We should say, this is what a CA bundle is, bang, and then we can go to the cert manager people and say, hey, this is what a CA cert bundle looks like. Can we help you, support that?
Okay, I'm following you. Yeah, because I understand where Makai is coming from. There's nothing secret with the CA certificate, but on the other hand, I know that kind of what Rob was saying is like anything at all security related seems to, lean towards using a secret. So that's why I was curious if Cert Manager is going to be a common integration. If we should choose one or the other based on ease of integration.
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
mean, to
very
my knowledge,
familiar.
sorry.
I'm not very familiar with Cert Manager. Does it actually publish the CA?
Yeah, what it typically does is when it generates a secret, it will put some of the, I was talking about this the other day, it puts some of the chain in the tls.cert key, but I think it puts the root of the CA bundle in the ca.cert data field in the secret. You can also, I think there's also, I'm not sure if there's also ways to get to get it to publish just the bundle in the ca.cert field. As far as I know, it never puts anything in config maps today. But like you say, I don't think that there's any. I think I agree that CA bundles aren't secrets, sort of by definition.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. I'll be sure to follow up with this one. It seems like there's broad consensus to split this out, and I should take a bit of a survey around the community again just to see how broadly certificates, well, CA bundles are supported, and what kind of resources they're most commonly stored in. If it is secrets, maybe I'll at least default to referencing a secret here. And yeah, maybe there's a place for describing how we could reference this in a no. I think we should suggest they should be in one kind of resource and go with that. So yeah, I'll follow up on this one. Thanks for the great feedback here. And I'm also, as I'm looking at this, I'm realizing I haven't removed all the proto tags yet. So at least one more.
Yeah, I
thing
popped that in a comment
thank you.
the PR. Also
Thanks.
another comment, but I'm still going to go through and review and
Appreciate it.
add more comment.
Great. Well, I know
we need to do a pass. Should we just do a full pass in a single PR and just like nuke proto tags from everything all at once?
I think they're mostly gone. but yeah, we should double check. I know. So what happened here is I rebased and they're removed from all existing fields, but because I'm adding a bunch of fields, they didn't get removed when I rebased. I missed that. So yeah, but I'll have to double check. I think they're gone from most places already, but yeah. All right, well, yeah, I guess we are over time, but thank you to everyone for the great feedback. I think we're making great progress here. And yeah, I'll follow up on this PR shortly. Thanks, everyone.